Patience, Mr. Angus. You're next up. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm only taking time now to speak because I feel that, contrary to the glib lines I hear from my Liberal colleagues, that this is a conversation that we're all working to get a better motion. I feel that someone has to come in occasionally just to set on the record what's actually happening. Every time we reach a point, whether or not by vote or even by amendment or by compromise, the yardsticks change again for the Liberals. So we just went through today a couple of attempted motions on the documents because the Liberals have been obsessed about the documents. We've given a number of times on the documents. They've lost 2 votes today. And now suddenly they're no longer talking about the documents. They're talking about the motion in general, their opposition to it. So we get told, well, we really want to work with you on the motion, and let's construct a motion that works for us. And then we get told that the motion itself is problematic. Listen, I get it. When you're in government and you get into an ethical scandal, you don't like it. You don't like people holding you to account. This isn't just a Liberal thing. My Conservative colleagues can probably tell you how much they disliked me when I was taking on issues of Mike Duffy, Bev Oda and her infamous $1,500 limo rides, Pamela Wallen, the Nigel Wright case. These issues happen. Conflict of interest, breaches of the Lobbying Act, helping friends out happen when you're in government. What I find particularly striking about the Liberal government is Liberals don't seem to think that these laws actually apply to them, because in every case, whoever gets in trouble, well, they were a good friend. They were good. I mean, we've seen Mr. Sorbert say that, about, Mr. David McNaughton, even mentioning his name after his great service to the country. Mr. Dong telling us that we have to be very careful about the adverse effect that we are going to have by bringing forward, for example, the case of Mr. McNaughton. Mr. McNaughton was Justin Trudeau's co-chair, election co-chair. He was then made ambassador to the United States, the highest post you can get diplomatically. I've had a number of problems with the Trudeau government giving partisan appointments to diplomats because it gets us into trouble. Mr. McCallum is a perfect example. So what we see with Mr. McNaughton is he goes from being a Liberal electoral co-chair, knowing every single person in the Liberal Party, being very close to the Prime Minister, to becoming ambassador of the most important post. So when you come back, you have lots of contacts. But we have laws in this country. I know it seems to bother the Liberals, but the Conflict of Interest Act has real provisions about what you can do with that knowledge so that you can't just use it to your own personal advantage. And Mr. McNaughton was found guilty by the Ethics Commissioner. This isn't about the opposition presupposing something or damaging a company's reputation. The company that we're talking about is Palantir, a company that, if my colleagues Google them, are notorious around the world on allegations of human rights violations, actually being involved in the possible case of state-sanctioned extrajudicial killings. They've been identified with the worst of the Trump administration's targeting and separation of immigrant families. So Palantir brings a very, very questionable legacy coming into this country, and Mr. McNaughton becomes their Canadian president, and he's not registered to lobby. And lo and behold, he has meetings with all manner of very top Liberals. And of course, it's all supposed to be about the pandemic. So the Liberals will tell us this was all the things we were doing in the pandemic to keep people safe. The fact is, if you have a company as controversial as Palantir, people should know why they're meeting with the Deputy Prime Minister. And if they're going to be holding these meetings, they should follow the laws of the land. And that's the Lobbying Act. And those laws weren't followed. So we need to find out why this was allowed to happen. We need to shine a light on it. As it says in the book of Luke, that what is done in the dark will be shown in the light, and what is whispered in the back rooms will be shouted from the rooftops. Because when someone is powerful, as Mr. McNaughton uses his position to further the interests of a company like Palantir, it is not in the interests of the Canadian people. And it comes to our committee to look at that. But now we're being told that we're presupposing, we're acting, we're gonna put a chill on all manner of people who are doing this kind of thing. I hope we're putting a chill on them. For God's sakes, we should be putting a chill on them. That is the work of an ethics committee that is not afraid to take on the issues. But again, what we've seen this afternoon is we went from arguing about the documents and not wanting to put Speaker Spotlight in a situation of contempt of Parliament, where we know there's no way, if they comply with the laws and they have the documents or don't have the documents, they will be judged based on having followed the law. They're not going to be hung out, in the public square, unlike the Liberals are trying to insinuate. But we've moved from discussing documents now to they're back to how we damaged We Charity, and by asking questions. We hurt tens of thousands of young people. That's what the Liberal line is. And this is a false line. The question about We Charity was about their relations with key Liberals, the ability of the Kielburger brothers to walk in, to call up and not be registered to lobby, but to call senior ministers. And in fact, with Bill Morneau, send him a personal email on April 10th, and 11 days later, get a $12 million deal. And while they're doing that, get the inside scoop on this Canada Summer Service Grant. What got we into trouble was that there were many, many questions about this deal that could not be answered credibly. Questions that I have pointed out, but obviously my colleagues weren't listening, that if due diligence had been done, this deal may never have gotten off the ground in the first place, and we would have continued doing the work it was doing. Questions about lobbying, questions about oversight, questions about their supposed relationship with Imagine Canada, that they were going right to cabinet and saying they had this signed agreement when Imagine Canada was saying they had nothing to do with it. We have an obligation to find out if these issues were advanced improperly because of political connections that we know with the We Group is tied directly to payments to the Prime Minister's mother and brother, and using the Prime Minister's wife as a goodwill ambassador. It's not that the Prime Minister, and nobody's ever suggested that the Prime Minister gave them the contract because of these payments. The question is whether the other ministers and civil servants were influenced to give We a pass because of the connections that they had built with Minister Qualtrough, Minister Ng, and certainly Minister Morneau, deeply, deeply involved in very questionable manners in terms of their relationship, which cost, I think, Mr. Morneau his job. So this is our work. The Liberals are obstructing our work. Every time they get one argument voted down, they go to the next one. So we are now close to 35 hours into this obstruction and gridlock. I say we've run out of road. We are not having a conversation here. We're dealing with deliberate obstruction of our work, and it's making our committee look ridiculous. It's turning our work into a mockery. So I say we put it to a vote, and we can get on with our weekend and then start coming up with our witness list so we can get this committee study done and then move on to other issues. So I test the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Angus. I'll see if there's a unanimous consent to continue to vote. There's no consensus, Mr. Angus. Now on to Ms. Lambropoulos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for allowing me the opportunity to speak. I'm not a regular on this committee, as many of you probably know. This is my first time on this committee, and I'm happy to get the opportunity to speak, mainly because I do have firsthand experience with We organization. As a former high school teacher in Montreal, many of the teachers that worked with me actually were engaged with projects with We organization that benefited some of the students at my school. And I know that my school is only an example of one very small example compared to the amount of amazing work that this organization does across Canada. I know that there are over 400 schools just in the province of Quebec that actually benefited from WE and that worked directly with WE on student leadership and it's to basically help their students get amazing experiences doing important work across the world. And I think that it's really unfortunate what not obviously, I'm sure that it wasn't the intention of the opposition, it wasn't the intention of the committee, but the amazing work that has been done through this organization over the last decade has sort of been undermined and ridiculed a little bit through the current discussions that have been taking place. And unfortunately for the organization, it's been quite damaging to them. And I think that's extremely unfortunate because they do exceptional work. And I do believe that in the time of pandemic, in the time of that we're currently living, COVID-19, many of the programs that the government of Canada has put out has been done in a very quick manner in order to bring help as quickly as possible to Canadians. Now, we know that many different Canadians all Canadians almost have been impacted by COVID-19 in some way or another. Youth has been particularly impacted. A lot of young people that I speak to don't know what the future holds for them, don't know what type of work experiences they'll be able to get in the near future. You know, they're finishing university and they're obviously investing in their education right now because they see it as a perfect opportunity to do so, considering the fact that they're home and they're staying home and they don't see an end to this thing. But the Canada Student Service Grant would have been a great opportunity for many students across Canada to get these extra experiences in and to get something on their CV that looks great and that prepares them for a job in the future when finally we get out of this crisis and when the economy gets back on its feet. So I just wanted to point out the fact that it's unfortunate that that's what's going on right now with this organization. And to talk about, again, my experience, I know that there are many young people that were looking forward to this. And unfortunately, this year, opportunities were taken away from thousands of young Canadians because of what happened and what's transpired in the last couple of months. And I'm really hoping that, in the coming year, whatever program gets brought out, actually does get to benefit the kids and the students that it will benefit. Another point that I wanted to make is Baylis Medical Company is a company in my riding. It is one with a great reputation here in Saint Laurent. Another company in my riding that received funds to create ventilators was CAE, also in my riding. It happens to be an industrial hub here in Quebec, the riding of Saint Laurent. And so I was quite happy that a lot of the businesses in the riding actually did get these types of contracts because, obviously Canadians needed to feel like ventilators would be accessible if ever the second wave were to come. And when finally, they would need a hospital and would need the extra help because of the virus, which we don't yet know the full effects of. And we don't know where the second wave of the virus will bring us. We don't know how many Canadians are going to eventually need to end up on a ventilator. So obviously it was important that the government take the necessary precautions and take the necessary steps to ensure that Canadians would be safe for the long term and that we have enough medical equipment to be able to offer to as many Canadians as need be. Again, as my colleague, Mr. Dong, had mentioned during his presentation and during what he was mentioning earlier, it wasn't necessarily, the contract was not given directly to Baylis Medical. They were subcontracted, just as other companies are. And we know that in the grand scheme of things, companies never work independently to do these things. There are always many companies that come into play when producing any type of equipment where, a company is never in it alone, right? They need supplies from different types of companies, and it's only normal that one of the companies would be the one with a good reputation, Baylis Medical Company. It could have been any medical company, but obviously I think that the reason why we're looking into this is because, the Baylis Company is obviously related to Frank Baylis, which is a previous member, a member that was previously sitting in the House of Commons. And I definitely don't think we would have probably turned a blind eye to it if the company name was something different, or if it wasn't something that was completely related to a past member. And as was mentioned, I remember in the House of Commons, one of the contracts, specifically the one given to, or the one affiliated with Baylis Medical, was one that a known conservative supporter received from the federal government. So it's not a partisan issue in this particular case. It's really making sure that the companies that have the tools necessary to give us the equipment that we need in the coming months, which we may very well need even more than we've prepared for. We don't know yet. That they get the contracts that we get to offer, because we need to make sure that we're protecting as many Canadians as possible. So those are the points that I wanted to flag. I don't know, I know that this committee has been sitting for quite a while, many hours. I did not hear all of the arguments because this is the first hour that I sit on this committee. So I definitely don't know what was previously stated, but I did want to really bring in my experience as a teacher, because I know many people who have directly benefited from WE, and I think it's very unfortunate right now that so many students and young people who I technically, feel like I represent, because as one of the youngest MPs in the Canadian Parliament, I definitely feel like it's my responsibility to be their voice and to represent them. I definitely feel like they were robbed of an opportunity because of how things transpired, and I definitely don't see how this study would help that in the future. I would like for us to come up with new ways to be able to support young people and to be able to create opportunities for them that they will benefit from in the long term. But I don't necessarily see how doing this type of study on this committee would help us get there faster. If anything, I think that maybe a lot of the supports that we're giving may come to a halt if we were to continue going ahead, and I wouldn't want to see that. So I'm really hoping that these points are taken into account when making a final decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Lambropoulos. We'll now move to Mr. Sorbera.